go watch television, I guess.
Oh.
Before we start, or while we're waiting for the others, has anyone seen the Bertolucci movie of Sheltering Sky?
No.
Long ago.
No.
No, I've heard about it though. John Malkovich is in it?
Remember. It's been way too long. I remember very little about it.
It's Deborah Winger.
Yes.
I will tell you in a second. It may well be John Malkovich.
Okay.
It's
Oh.
devastating. I remember that about it.
Nice.
Yeah.
I remember just being completely exhausted by the end of it.
Mm, mm.
Excellent. So you mean it's true to the book?
I think so, yeah.
Well, let's go ahead because it is now 6 after the hour.
Do you want to repeat? You want to repeat your question? Should we start that way?
Well, or you know what? We have an old habit which I still enjoy, which is just going around and everyone says their like top line impression about the book without necessarily quoting anything, but just say, hey, what they thought overall. So we can start with anyone. Jay, do you want to give us your first thoughts?
It is John Malkovich.
Okay.
First thoughts. Since Doreen came in on my first thought there, I did share my first thought with Doreen as usual. I said it sort of reminded me of Virginia Woolf running into the Stockholm syndrome with a little bit of Tennessee Williams somewhere thrown in. I guess it was an interesting book, but maybe, I don't know, maybe it, in my mind, maybe it didn't age well, which I found to be true with Hemingway as well. And he was writing obviously during some of this period too. So I don't know what maybe in the 40s was sort of an interesting approach, perhaps is less interesting now. I'm not sure, but I guess that was my overall impression.
Nice. Miriam or whomever?
Yeah, I will chime in a little bit. I couldn't help thinking of colonialism and the awful price of colonialism, and how Bowles is absolutely unafraid of portraying this country, this North Africa and the French colonies, as anything but filthy. The people, diseased, dirty. I mean, you could just add up all the passages that portray them as these disgusting, foreign, strange people. And that was interesting to me, that he had the freedom the book was published in 49 to do that. I also couldn't help comparing it to Under the Volcano, the Malcolm Lowry novel, in which you have the disintegration of the expatriate. Of course, in Sheltering Sky, we have these 3 Americans who are really rather naive, seeking something, maybe oblivion, and disintegrating. And in an odd way, it's also a bit like, I know this may sound strange, Joseph Conrad's book, the one that the title escapes.
Heart of Darkness?
Yeah, Heart of Darkness, of course, because in Heart of Darkness, when you encounter and enter this strange territory, you are corrupted in some way. And that's what happens to Kit, in those strange, sections about her sex with these people, these others. And she goes crazy. It's that she goes mad. Anyway, there's a lot more we could say about all of that. Stop there. We'll get back to it.
Great. Doreen or Mark?
Mark, you want to go ahead?
Well, as has happened before, I'm only 2/3 through, so I'm going to give a little more than half-baked views, 2/3 baked maybe. But I'm definitely going to finish this one because I wanted to read it. And so my impressions are that I mean, it strikes me some parts of it were a little stilted and didn't live up to expectation, but overall, I think that I really was enjoying the the way that it was playing with existentialist themes. I mean, it was in some ways more relatable than maybe some of the other existentialist writers. So I liked that, and who doesn't like a good travelogue?
Great. Doreen?
I found it compelling. Like, I enjoyed the reading of it. And I enjoyed some of the philosophical questions about the meaning of life. But it seemed like a lot of the meaning was that it was meaningless. And I couldn't really relate to that. I'm kind of more romantic and sentimental and justice oriented and love oriented. And when she says at the end, "Oh, well, Port, I love you," I'm like, you're full of shit. You didn't really love him. You kind of depended on him and he kind of depended on you. And that's not love. And it was almost, I don't know, codependent, some weird relationship. By the end, I was like, what the hell are they trying to say exactly? And so I can't say that I enjoyed it. I couldn't put it down. I found the reading pleasurable, but the themes in the end, and especially like, yes, I know she's crazy, but I felt like, she was like letting herself be raped by these people. She's marrying this guy. Maybe she's completely nuts. I can understand that, but still, I was like grossed out, completely grossed out.
Great reaction. I love it. Well, thanks. I loved all of
That's so naive, or you?
No.
It's so unsophisticated how I compare how I react to how you react, Miriam. You're talking about colonialism, and I'm like, I was grossed out.
I think that this might be one of the most interesting book clubs we have, because the reactions have all been classic and varied. So I'm going to get to there, but I think the book then already has a lot to say for it. They're going to get so many interesting reactions. I was not happy at first, but I was really intrigued. It was not what I expected, which I kind of like. Eventually, I found it hypnotic. And obviously the landscapes and the environment helped a lot in that for me. I thought it had some incredible imagery that I enjoyed, and again, a novel that's set in such a picturesque place. But that was very rewarding. For me, it was particularly interesting because the protagonist is, or one of the protagonists is killed off 2/3 of the way through. Sorry if I'm spoiling anything, Mark, but
I see it coming.
We're
almost there. I was thinking his pulse was fading fast.
But I have to say, I mean, Paul Bowles, he's as Miriam pointed out, he wasn't that complimentary of where he was living, but he lived there all his life, pretty much. And so he was an expat. So I found that particularly interesting. I like to think a little bit lightly, like, well, okay, if I go native, that's how it goes. And so it really was, yeah. So I was fascinated, I think, by the end. And I think it's a little more richer book than I thought at first. So let's go ahead.
I
We
just
don't
want
have.
to say one comment
Yeah.
to Miriam, because in some way I think he made the American characters as beautiful and clean and pristine as and elite as they are. I think he made them uglier characters and showed more sympathy to the native populations by making them so ugly, so that we're seeing the world through through these obviously distorted eyes. So
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And I think where the difficulty with the American characters is that what are they? They have money, they're rootless, but they're empty. But my sympathy for them, particularly for Port, is that he's so incredibly vulnerable, and fated to die.
Yeah.
Uh,
And actually, I wanted to add, I love Miriam's literary references also, or comparisons. And based on those alone, I mean, this might be a more important book than on first glance. But let's see. I mean, I on the lighter side, you know, I guess now at least I know what it would be like to travel with truly neurotic and rich New Yorkers.
It was so interesting to me. There are two places I think Kit opens up her handbag
Hmm.
and brings out her various cosmetics, what are they? Helena Rubinstein and everything like that in it. And then later on,
And lines them up.
and she sort of lines them up. That's America. Is that our civilization? But I thought it was very, very interesting that when it happens the first time, it's a way for her to find herself in a way
Yeah.
with objects. And then later on in the book, when she's among all the others, the various wives and everything, and they discover what's in her handbag, and Kit looks at them and she thinks, oh, these are relics from a lost civilization. So it is pathetic, but I have sympathy there. I mean, Bowles is trying to, definitely show us something.
What we hold on to when we're deracinated, which is one of the
Yes.
books.
Well, what is it really? What do we really
Uh-huh.
have?
So, well, let's step back a little bit because I like to start off. What genre is this book, in your opinion? I think Mark mentioned travelogue, which is more.
existential travelogue.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what I was expecting, perhaps. So, what did you all think?
Oh, it's fiction.
Okay, but I mean, beyond that. So, what kind of fiction, or if it were, yeah, maybe if it was a nonfiction, what genre? Is it a travelogue? Is it a?
No, it's a novel in which we have three characters who are put in a situation. Two, the foremost, a Turner, a Kit, and Port, in which they are incredibly vulnerable in this strange land.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And anyone else have some thoughts? Because what else were you expecting, or?
Well, I guess maybe I was looking too deep too, but I finally came to some essence to me about the book on page 231.
Mhm.
And this is where it seems to me that Kit comes to agree to understand two different things. One, what death was all about, and maybe that's what the sheltering sky to some degree was trying to protect everybody from the other universe and all the bad things, and the sheltering sky is really a facade. and that you get into the thing about now she did not remember many conversations built around the idea of death, perhaps because no idea about death has anything in common with the presence of death. That
I
starts
think you might have a different version. Where are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see that on this page.
on 231.
What
How
does
many
your book
pages
look
are in your
like?
book?
That chapter 24, second page?
Oh,
Yeah,
we have a different version.
okay,
Oh,
okay.
Is it what chapter is it?
What chapter?
this is 24.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
20. Yeah.
okay.
And that would be 237 in mine.
230 in mine. So anyway, around there. All right, but okay.
Well, that was one thing.
Could you
I
read
hate
the
to say
passage
that.
again and maybe I can find it?
I'm sorry, Doreen.
Could you read the passage again so I can try and find it?
Yeah. Now she did not remember. There are many You find it?
I'm looking.
I did.
Oh.
I did. It's the second page of chapter 24.
Yeah.
Down in the bottom last third of the page.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
And so it's sort of like all of this. Well, first of all, I think the book is a little bit, after having read about the author's life and his own travels, a little bit of an autobiography. And he talks about the reason that the character died was because he felt he owed that death, and that he himself wanted to see death from the inside. And this is where they really sort of address death. And I thought that was kind of profound within what they were doing. And then the second part was that when she becomes conscious again, that so that in reality, it would be she who would have ceased to exist, at least to a great degree, that her identity didn't exist except in the eyes of somebody else. And that seems to be one of the struggles that she had throughout the book until she finally just gives up completely and decides she has no identity, I guess.
Well, thank you, Jane. You know, I think I appreciate your response because it's already teasing out for me some other ideas. You're talking, it's fiction for sure, but we're talking a little more philosophical fiction. Even it's fiction bordering on autobiography. Mark said something earlier that is something that I thought, I don't know if there is a genre, but American existentialism.
Oh, it's absolutely a genre.
No.
He was writing at the same time as
Yeah, but then the American type of it, and I think someone said also that it was like a little more readable than the French existentialist, but a little more compelling.
Well, where it becomes existentialist, that is the whole question of nothingness. Is there anything? And also, does anything have any meaning?
Yeah. And I would, just to be on the light side again, I would say it's American existentialism bordering on a self-help book. Okay, so any other genre ideas or anyway,
It did read like a travel book.
yeah, exactly.
That's what I was thinking. Like you probably suggested it, thinking
yeah,
it was
absolutely.
a travel book, right?
That's why it wasn't quite what I expected. Yeah, it was very interesting. Okay, well, I think we brought it up already, but what is that big, huge sky sheltering against?
Well, if you look at the passage, this is also in chapter 23, actually. It's right before, it's at the very end of chapter 23.
Mm.
And Port is dying. Oh, by the way, this is one of the most vivid, graphic descriptions of illness that I have ever read.
Mm-hmm.
His death, it's typhus, right? And
Yeah, typhoid.
it's
Same
so
thing.
absolutely ghastly. And of course he's running very, very high fevers. So the passage goes, his cry went on through the final image, the spots of raw bright blood on the earth, blood on excrement, the supreme moment high above the desert when the two elements, blood and excrement, long kept apart, merge. A black star appears, a point of darkness in the night sky's clarity, point of darkness and gateway to repose. Reach out, pierce the fine fabric of the sheltering sky, take repose. So I think Jay mentioned, and I think it's true, this fine fabric is what protects us from death and this horrible vision of blood and excrement. But the movement toward death is almost positive, pierce this fine fabric. And as far as what's existential, it's this terrible vision of darkness and death under the dark star rather. Oddly enough, it's very well written, but oddly enough, it's so dark, and yet there's something about the passage from life to death that's uplifting here. Pierce fine fabric and get to the real thing. And the real thing is death. Yeah.
I love it that
Had a chance to see the movie. It goes on and on and on, his death.
Uh-huh.
And I must have seen the movie when it came out. I don't know, maybe it was the 80s. And I can still vividly remember the despair I felt.
Wow.
I don't remember, that it was Malkovich or anything. I just remember the despair, the utter despair.
Well, and I agree with Miriam that death, the writing of the whole death, illness and death was incredible. And you have to think that's the most miraculous part of the autobiography.
Yeah.
But other thoughts on the sky? So death, for sure. Any other thoughts?
There was another part where he said the sky was darkness. I should be better at underlining these things.
I would say that death and disease occur all through the novel. I mean, the children are diseased. I mean, I made a whole list. The children are diseased. The blind men, infection and disease play out all through that, all through it.
And I thought that was so curious because so many times a travel book is like these groovy things you're supposed to see,
Right.
like tourist attractions. And instead it's like a gross fountain, a dead fig tree with barbed wire, diseased animals, kids with sores.
Dog with the dead baby, that was the corker.
Oh,
Right? The dogs with the dead baby.
Well,
and then the mom gets killed by a scorpion. My God, it just goes on and on. It's that,
It's wonderful.
The travel book is supposed to be fun. This is the total downer travel book.
Well, I'm going to try to expand it a little bit from death and gloom. At the beginning of chapter 4, second page, which is page 15 on my paperback version. Ford says something interesting. He goes that he was repeatedly tracing rapid figure eights with his right index finger. He sighed and made himself stop doing it. So what's a figure eight? It's an infinity symbol. And so I'm going to push that sky, and then I think later, at least in this version, chapter, I don't know, chapter, this is page 94, there we are, chapter 8. It does mention, I mean, we're out in the desert, and the sky there is also a massive presence. So in that sense, it's closer to you. And I think here this port says that the sky here the sky is very strange. So I'd like to put forward that we're also talking about this thin something or another that is protecting them from something infinite, eternal.
Say that again.
Infinite and internal. as in eternity, so that the sky is a thin line.
Well, he says that at one point earlier in the book. I can't remember where, that it's this, the sky is, protecting from something, from that infinity.
Yeah.
I would also liken this, the sky to, I mean, just in existentialism, I mean, in Beckett and all of this, it's about stripping, it's all about stripping things away to just the essence of the living being and this planet that we're on. And so, being in the desert is like being on an empty stage in a Beckett play. It's like everything is stripped away. There's the desert and the sky. So the sky is what's there when everything else is removed. It's what we're living in, and and I do remember a line about what protecting us from what's beyond it, because while we're on this planet, that's what we're surrounded by.
Yeah.
And then we go beyond it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I was attracted to the book, not just that it sounded like a travel log or travel writer's recounting, but also I'm very attracted to deserts. I love the desert Southwest in the United States. My mom was a painter and lived out in New Mexico for 3 decades. And I'm just very attracted to it. And there's something highly spiritual about deserts. You think of the desert fathers back at the beginning of Christianity and other places. So there's something highly spiritual about deserts that are in some ways cleansing for the souls. But how about these guys, this American trio? We've already talked on them because they're not the most attractive threesome that I've ever read of, but they certainly are interesting.
Well, Bowles turns a critical eye, and that passage about the figure eights before that, he says the Spanish maid at the hotel had said to him that noon, La vida es peña. Of course, he had replied, feeling false even as he spoke, asking himself if any American can truthfully accept a definition of life which makes it synonymous with suffering.
Mhm.
But at the moment, so he's thinking about, when Americans are always being criticized for being so optimistic and positive about things, though I think now we're learning that we can't be. But so he's turning this critical eye on these Americans. So he feels false when he says that, but at the same moment he had approved her sentiment because she was old, withered so clearly of the people. So he's criticized. Then he's criticizing the whole populist notion that truth resides with the people, right? For years, it had been one of his superstitions that reality and true perceptions were to be found in the conversations of the laboring classes, even though now he saw clearly that their formulas of thought and speech are as strict and as patterned, and thus as far removed from any profound expression of truth as those of any other class. So he's waiting for these gems of wisdom that might come from their mouths, but it does not come from them either. So the whole novel is, what is truth? What isn't truth? And he's just not going to embrace the people as the fountain of truth, the laboring classes. So 1949, post-war, the Russians, so he's not going to go for socialism and communism and the idealization of the laboring classes. So here we have 3 Americans who, they're so adrift. And then Kit is prone to terrible, terrible anxiety, right? Terror, her experience of terror.
Yeah.
I guess there may be some, I don't know, in the mind of the reader. I think the thing about the post-war era where they're saying, okay, why don't we go to Europe? because we've destroyed, Europe has been destroyed. So no need to go there. So there's somewhat of a condemnation of war, just a little bit. There's obviously a reflection on colonialism when they're talking about the French officers sort of living in their isolation from the population that they're supposed to be governing, and the difficulties that they have in doing that. There's also somewhat, I think, talking about stereotyping. For example, when the passports were stolen, the first person to accuse was the owner of the hotel, because he was the Arab, and he was for the expat, he was the foreigner, not them. And it turns out he didn't steal anything at all. And that in the conversation that the couple had when they were the guest of this gentleman at his little house oasis, and finally when Kit breaks it away and she says, well, it was a really superficial conversation, and he turns to her and he says, well, maybe it was a two-dimensional conversation. It had much more to it than you were really perceiving. I think on the one hand, like Miriam said, they're talking about this dirty, terrible, horrible place. On the other hand, I think they're talking about it's a different culture. We tend to stereotype different cultures, and that's a very American thing. And we tend to accuse them of things from the very beginning. If something is not, if we don't understand, it's their fault. If something is missing, it's their fault. So maybe within this travelogue, it was sort of the precursor of The Ugly American, I guess, as I think about it a little bit too.
There's that, but I think still there's Bowles must have been a very super sensitive person, but because there's throughout the whole novel, there's just a feeling of revulsion and disgust. So there's one point where Kit's on the train and she's eating something and she looks at this man and she realizes
Ace or something?
eating locusts. He's eating locusts. So that strangeness of the other culture is really experienced as disgust and revulsion. It's so strange. It's so different.
But this is a different kind of autobiography, if it's that then, because Bowles is talking about himself.
Yeah.
So, and yet he spent his whole life there. He learned the language fluently so he could then translate books from Arabic to English. So he dedicated his life to this culture. So again, maybe he took part of his personality's reaction to the local. But back to Jay's point, as Jay pointed out, this was a colonial time, but who were the anti-colonialists? It was the Americans. And so, yes, these guys were separated by their own bubble. They were wealthy, for one thing. So they were kind of, what do you call it? The restless wealthy with nothing better to do. And yet they are the ones who, there is very much a we versus them throughout the book, because the cultures are so entirely different. And yet it's the Americans who, for better or worse, break through the thin membrane between the we and them, one via death, the other via going native or insane or whatever you want to call it.
I have an annoying question. When Kit was being violated the first time,
by Tunner?
She goes from being violated to sort of enjoying the encounter. And I don't know, maybe that's just a politically unacceptable approach to rape today. I'm not sure.
Well, if you're talking about an encounter that with the the Arabs, there was a previous violation, which was on the train with Tunner.
Yeah, well, that one was sort of that was an alcoholic encounter kind of thing after eating some bad bread. Yeah, I'm putting that one aside and thinking about the one with the sheik.
Well, okay, but I wouldn't put it aside. I would compare them.
Okay, all right.
I haven't gotten to the later one, but what I'm hearing you all describing in it, I don't. I mean, I think that in some sense he's asking about what's the difference between them. Is there really that much difference between them? You know, when you ask about what the trio is like to me, so, you know, in one sense, they're beautiful, romantic, adventuring, you know, they have these amazing, this willingness to go and explore and be in other cultures and get into some exciting, take risks and get into very, intense experiences. But then they're also at the same time, and at the same time, they are looking at everyone else in this really disdainful way. You know, when they talk about, humanity is of no interest. It's everyone but yourself. So it's like, it's such a supreme selfishness that they represent. I mean, he's taken some trends and sensitivities in himself and he's pushed it into an extreme, I think, in these characters. And so they're, so even that, romantic scene with Tunner and her on a train is really it's really a quiet rape thing going on. It's a,
well, one was sort of consensual. The one that you haven't gotten to wasn't consensual at all.
I wouldn't call that one consensual.
No? Okay.
It became consensual. It became consensual because she got into it. But she was trying everything to avoid it. Did she actually say no? I think she said, she certainly was thinking it. I don't remember if she said it.
I don't know if you guys have the Tobias Wolff preface, but the way he puts it, which is just a step back from those two potential rape scenes, is he says that the story is a tour de force like the sheltering sky, an ominous parable of the weakening of the individual will, its attraction to submission, even to oblivion. So whether or not she was actually turned on by being raped is maybe not of great importance, but that she was into submission, I think, is what the author might be getting at. And then don't forget that she and Port had a completely, from the sound of it, that they were unable to perform. So that Port, being a pseudo-intellectual or intellectual completely wrapped up in his own thinking, has a beautiful wife, if I read the story correctly, yet he's unable to approach her. And so they're unable to do their marriage things. And for, I don't know how long that's been going on, but I believe the whole story here, so she goes elsewhere eventually.
Yeah.
She becomes completely drugged by sex.
Mm-hmm.
There are scenes where she's in this room and that she just becomes a kind of sex slave, and her whole identity is, dependent upon that.
Yeah, and well before that too, in her relationship with him, everything is, she's just wanting to be, defined by her relationship to him. Or when it was the two of them, it was her relationship to the two of them. So it's, I've read some of his short stories, but I haven't read anything else. So I don't know if this was something about how he thought of and portrayed women, or if it was just this character, or if it was just the point he was making, exploring.
Well, Bowles was gay.
That's
Well, you think so? Or he had a wife, but
Oh,
you're saying
well,
bisexual.
Me
he
too.
was,
Sorry?
She too.
he was definitely gay.
And
Okay,
so is she.
but you're saying that they weren't bisexual, so they just were cohabitating.
Well, bisexual, I don't know, but I would say that he was predominantly gay.
Okay.
that would map well with this couple, because here you've got the that young kid Lyle, or Eric Lyle or whatever, who was
Yeah.
looking at him like he wanted him, and yeah, and that would explain the relationship they have as well, the lack of sexual relationship, and yet it's a spiritual connection, intellectual connection.
Well, but remembering Port does go with that young prostitute or young girl woman towards the beginning. So it's not
Oh
that,
yeah,
yeah.
you're right. He's not gay, because he also went for the blind dancer.
Right.
Yeah. So again, we're reading into it because thinking of what the author was like.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah.
But the next question, and I don't mean to pick on the American woman by saying, coincidentally, this year we've gone from Alcott's Joe to McCullers Mick to Kit.
Mm.
And maybe what I'm trying to get at is more what's the progression in the portrait of an American. I think you could think more about the American woman as one side, but I'm more interested in that. And just broadly speaking, if you think of it, Alcott's Joe leaves home but returns home. Mick leaves home and doesn't really return home, but doesn't go that far. And now we have Kit, who goes really far and never even gets close to coming home. So what do you think? What's happening? What's happening to Americans?
My sense, if you want to look at that progression, and Miriam, I'm sure you'll be more articulate than I am about this, but think of Joe, think of when the books were written, right? 1920s. When was Little Women?
18 something, right?
18 something, right? So for Joe to have a job.
After the Civil War, so I think it was 1880.
Right. For Joe to have a job was about as independent as women could get.
Mm-hmm.
Then Nick is at a later time in the 1920s. She gets a job at Woolworths and she helps support the family, right? And she doesn't have to do it by educating kids, which is what Joe had to do. Yes, she was also a writer, but in the end, they have a school, right? That was one of the few options that were open to women. And then, you see over time that women become more independent. So you get Mick, who can get a job at Woolworths, not only as a teacher, and help her family. And then you get into, the post-war period where you can travel around the world if you have a little bit more wealth and independence, and you can go from having to get married to not necessarily getting married to, having an unusual kind of relationship.
Yeah. And in some ways, this novel also is like the anti-1950s portrait, because we think of post-war America is on so many highs, if you will, right? Very optimistic, growing like gangbusters. Wealth is increasing. Families are able to do all sorts of things. They buy homes in the suburbs. They have, so it's all of that kind of, maybe utopic ideal.
This is published in 49.
Yeah,
The war is still really, really raw, I would imagine.
I guess so, but things are still, what is that, 4 years after the war? Things are gangbusters already, I would guess. I don't think the United States is into deprivation. And so this novel is like the opposite of, it's exposing part of the American character that really was not getting attention, particularly going forward from that point. So And again, novels are and fiction is for that. It's to explore all parts of the American psyche and personality. But
Excuse me if I can interrupt. Miriam, could you talk about the woman, American woman, and how
Yeah,
you
I
feel?
don't think we can generalize about Kit as being representative of, portraits of American women, but she's certainly, deeply hung up and deep, she's neurotic, doesn't even begin to describe her. But of course, you have to also think that in 1949 and going into the early 1950s, we had the whole film noir with the femme fatale and a deeply, deeply vulnerable man. So although we had heroic portraits of men that came out of the Second World War, those the notion of men losing their power after the war, coming back to this to the state and being extremely, extremely vulnerable. And if you look at film noir, it's one man after another is destroyed. And usually, it's a woman who does it. There's a marvelous Mitchum film, Out of the Past, that's all about that. So that sort of this male vulnerability and the inability to know what the hell to do with themselves, that's there as well. So although America, as Ben said, we were going to have tremendous prosperity and people buying their own homes and that kind of thing, there's also this other side, this questioning of, what it means to be a man. And I don't know when The Snows of Kilimanjaro was written. But again, we have, the man there in nature and the vultures circling up above. And he's also fated to die.
36.
Oh, yeah.
we spoke of independence, and Kit is not a good example of that, right? Because I think someone else mentioned it's like other people rule my life is her own, declaration. And that leads to insanity, I guess. So there's something lacking at the core there.
Well, I would say that it's not, I mean, she's been stripped down like everything else in this book. And so this is a stripped down version of woman. So I don't think it's an American woman per se. I think when she's on top of her game, she is that, but, and some of her attitudes, but I think it's a stripped down, thing of, just what is trying to explore what it means to be dependent, a woman who is, trying to define herself in relation to others. And it's what she goes through. She goes through these nightmarish experiences. I mean, I was just really blown away by that scene when she's trying to get away from the guy who wants to sleep with Tunner and goes into this train car experience that is like just something out of a surrealist imagination. It's an unbelievable scene, and then comes back and submits. And then later she's eating squirrel hair out of her soup, and she says, I mean, I love this line. And now that then I find out she does go crazy in the end, and it makes sense. You can put up with this sort of thing for just so long, and then you go crazy.
There you have it.
There you have it. And the hotel is just a nightmare. I mean, everything about it is like she's going through. It is a woman. It is a prototypical, or an uber kind of a female character going through and having nightmarish scenario, putting herself into a scenario where she's tested to her limits, as she said, this is a crisis. This is a crisis. She's reaching her crisis point, and what happens? So I don't think she's an American woman and could be compared to the others, because they're together, and this is about her being tested to her limits.
Yeah, and beyond. And remember, actually, Paul Bowles said in his own preface, he said, through whatever scenes of narrative moves, Kit is and remains an object. So that's on the last page of his preface that he wrote a little bit before he died. So looking back over the book, so she's an object, and that kind of, why did he say that? That kind of sounds like, materialism or whatever, being turned into an object. For whom? By whom? By Bowles? It was a curious comment, I thought.
Yeah, I didn't have that preface in my edition.
Was it somewhat curious that you have a married couple traveling together but having separate rooms?
Very.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure if they were really married or just had that, if that's just what they said to everyone. I wasn't sure.
I don't know.
Well, given how neurotic they both were, I think it's kind of understandable. Yeah, maybe you just wouldn't get any sleep at night if you were like in the bed with the other. I don't know. But well, I don't often go to the writer's life, but my edition at least had an incredible chronology of Paul Bowles' life towards the end. So I don't. Did everyone have that in yours, or if you had an older edition, perhaps not?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
I don't. So what did it add to your understanding of the book? I guess is what I'm getting
at. I guess to me it made it a little bit more curious, because I know some of us, and I guess myself included, have been expats at one time or another. My experience normally has been that you become somewhat enamored with the different society that you're enmeshed in, and you find it intriguing. And as you pointed out, Ben, that he spent his life learning the language, translating, and doing all this stuff. Yet he comes up with this book, which talks about how repugnant the society is. It was sort of interesting that it seems like that's from reading what his life was about. His perception or what he presented in the book was very different than what I think he was living.
Yeah, or maybe again pushing or pulling part of his own personality and exaggerating it, because his life was not that separated. That he dedicated his whole life to those people and that culture, if you will. I actually completely coincidentally, I was reading a review of a book by David Price Jones, a book called Signatures. And there's a quote in it that says, here it is, Paul and Jean Bowles in voluntary exile in Tangier are, quote, pioneers in the modern syndrome of being happy to be unhappy.
Okay. Well, then that's what this book is all about. Unhappy.
they're like reveling in it. They're rolling in it. Now, maybe the chronology, something struck me as weird. I don't know if you saw it. Supposedly, when he was 9 years old, not only is he buying dance records, he studies theory, sight signing, and piano techniques, and writes Le Carré, an opera in 9 chapters about 2 men who exchange wives.
At age 9?
The chronology
Yeah.
is right. Did you guys catch that? It's like he was born in 1910, and this is like 1919, and the next entry starts at 25. So when he's 15 years old. So either they got that. So anyway, I was like, oh, okay. Huh. Quite precocious, and already knew what he was going to be up to later, I guess. I don't know. When he was 27, and he had a whole musical side, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
he, what does it say here? Okay, on a trip to Mexico, Bowles goes to meet her parents the same evening. That would be Jane's parents, I believe. He orders 15,000 anti-Trotsky stickers to distribute in Mexico.
Mhm.
So what does that make him a Stalinist? I don't know. Who buys anti-Trotsky stickers? I'm looking for like points. Let's try to understand what.
Right.
All right. I don't know. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
He was hanging out with a lot of people came to visit him in Tangiers, from Gore Vidal to Truman Capote. So he was famous in his own day.
Yes.
And the other thing is he seems to have written a lot of stuff on Kif, which I don't even know what that is, but it's a hallucinogenic.
Mm.
Yeah,
So,
one of the people that came out to see him was one of the
William
I
Burroughs. William
Wow.
Burroughs. Yeah.
one of the poets from the 60s who like it was William Burroughs or
Yeah. So like a very interesting life. And you know, and I don't want to project too much into this, but in his relationship with Jane and what happens, it's almost as though, and he wrote the book when he was young, but it's almost as if he wrote the book and then he and his wife lived out. It was almost as if that was psychologically, and I don't know what the word for that is, but that you like you're projecting something. There's like certain role that, or model that you give yourself, and they end up living out some of these things. So they're I think they're unfaithful. They bring home other lovers and whatnot. She goes blind at some point. Anyway, I don't want to make all the parallels, but it was psychologically very interesting and a little bit bizarre.
For me, the paramount thing about his life was the fact that he placed himself in the milieu of the other, and that's where he was the most comfortable,
Yeah.
and that's where he lived, and that's where he had his, you know, I think he always probably felt like a traveler, just looking at life through, you know, that lens, looking at things in this very existential way.
The outsider, of course, is the classic writer,
Yeah.
right? So first, yeah, I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, but with a surrealist twist to it. I mean, it's not just being announced, not just being a hermit, but being in a place where everything is strange and fresh and different, and it makes you question everything and see everything in a different way. I think that's why he was an inspiration to the. I didn't know that he actually wrote on hallucinogens, you were saying, but it doesn't surprise me. He was a model for them because of there's a surrealist hallucinogenic quality to his existentialist.
Yeah. And one of his books in his 70s was Too Far From Home.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel that way sometimes too, but
Yeah. I want to go back to the portrayal of Kit, you know, the rich American woman with a handbag full of cosmetics and perfumes and such things. I thought that Bowles was very, very good in portraying her ambivalence and difficulty in caring for Port when Port was very ill. So at one point she feels it's her duty, but she's a bit revolted by it all. And yet she does, to some degree, do the right thing, but then she leaves him alone and goes off with Turner. So I think she does fall into the category of the unreliable woman.
Mhm.
Um,
And what causes that? Is it the materialism? Is it? Remember, she's driven by omens and signs.
signs and omens,
Yeah.
and her anxiety, you know, her terrible, terrible anxiety.
So imagine that, living your life based on omens.
and almonds, and the only thing you have is your lipstick. I mean, come on.
So I don't know if all of you had the Tennessee Williams review called An Allegory of Man and His Sahara at the end of the book.
I read parts of it, I think. Yeah.
But he you know, it actually, it gave me a different perspective on the book, because I was thinking, no, this is just pure existentialism. But his point, which I found very interesting and it challenged me, was he does say, with the hesitant exception of one or two war books by returned soldiers, The Sheltering Sky alone of the books that I have recently read by American authors appears to bear the spiritual imprint of recent history in the Western world. So one of my questions is, well, what do you think that refers to? To the spiritual.
I think colonialism.
Colonialism, yeah.
To be. It has to be, you know, the terrible price of colonialism, and the French are still paying for it.
Okay. Anyone thought differently? I might forward the Holocaust.
Oh, that's yeah.
And so that, you know, there was a nihilism exposed in World War II. So just how depraved and deeply evil human beings could be. And so, you know, I'm guessing, and actually at the end of the review, he was even more direct. He says, I suspect that a good many people read this book and be enthralled by it without once suspecting that it contains a mirror of what is most terrifying and cryptic within the Sahara of moral nihilism, into which the race of man now seems to be wandering blindly. Ouch. So he's taking the, you know, the desert metaphor and saying this is, you know, what happened to the world.
So help me, guys. What exactly is nihilism when nothing matters?
Yeah, belief in nothingness. Yeah.
Which isn't that far from existentialism. So I think you could say that they're somewhat aligned philosophies, right? But nihilism is I would say is even darker. Like there is no hope or meaning, and there never will be, perhaps. So he's pointing to what might be like even though Bowles might have been writing this on Kiff and having some really bizarre experiences, Tennessee Williams seems to be saying there was something deeply spiritual about this book and about this author. What do you all think?
There's one part where he says something about, you know, even if God is cruel, men are cruel, more cruel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, so I don't know. I'm putting it out there because back to my original thought that the sky is sheltering from eternity and infinity. It's the world nihilistic without any meaning is then a terrifying place, and that seems to be what Tennessee Williams is implying, that we've fallen into the Sahara of moral nihilism, in which we are wandering blindly. That doesn't sound very good.
No.
So does it sound, is Tennessee Williams reading too much into that? Do you think Bowles was hinting at some of that?
I'm not sure. But certainly the questions of whether life means anything, they're definitely raised in this book. That happens very explicitly. Where in existentialism, we don't have that bleakness because, you know, it's being or nothingness, and in some ways, the existential philosophers come out on the side of being. In other words, we confront this, and we confront it if we want to live a meaningful life, we face it and we confront it and we go on living, being. But here we don't have it.
And interesting, someone said this earlier. This is perhaps the most readable existentialist book. I remember reading Camus and Sartre in French, being forced to, which I guess for learning French, it was very interesting. But this book has not a fast-paced narrative, but it has it's compelling, as Doreen said. It pulls you in because, like, what are they doing? What is the problem? What is happening to this crazy threesome? And it's relentless. So, it's all like a relentless train building up to death and then insanity or whatever. And that's very dramatic compared to most existentialist books.
I don't understand if the sheltering sky is protecting you from infinity. What's infinity?
Well, eternal life, and then some
Yes,
creator, who's outside of time and space.
Oh, what he says in the book is, I found that place I was looking for. This is when they're sitting up on the rock, and looking at sunset. And so what is behind? Her voice was very small.
Darkness.
Nothing, I suppose, just darkness, absolute night.
And that's horrifying. So that it's interesting that Tennessee Williams took that outer darkness and then reflected that into the Sahara of nihilism. It's almost like, what do you call it? Some kind of wormhole where the nihilism out there is now all of a sudden it's in the Sahara Desert all around us.
And why are they there? Port says, I can't bear the winter. I have to go to a place where it's warm.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically the reason, but his life seems to have no other purpose. He talks about maybe writing, but then he abandons it. What's the use of doing that? That was to me very poignant in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe he'll get notebooks and he'll start making a record of all of this, but he doesn't do it.
And again, what an interesting alter ego for the author, because the author actually was very prolific.
Very prolific. And a worker.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
Jane Bowles herself wrote and published.
Mhm.
I haven't read anything that she's done, but she wrote and published as well.
Yeah, so they were smart people in reality, even if they were so happy to be unhappy. But maybe this is not so autobiographical. Maybe as I suggested, he was taking parts of his personality or the American person or whatever and running with it for a purpose. This us versus them. I don't know.
So,
There's a one.
Confused by our discussion. I'm sorry. So if it's sheltering you from infinity, and infinity is like heaven and something positive?
It's the dark star that, to pierce the fine fabric of the sheltering sky. The vision is death.
Okay.
Death and darkness and the dark star.
Mm-hmm.
it's what you have before death, before going into the night.
Mm-hmm.
It protects you in the sense that you're in it and in something before you go into absolute night.
Okay. All right. Now I'm getting it. Thank you.
The fine fabric of the sheltering sky, that's a very positive, lovely image. Fine fabric.
But it is a thin membrane because it doesn't seem like it's that the sheltering sky actually shelters.
Exactly. That's what was confusing me. It doesn't separate you from heaven
Or death.
It is the
shelter.
default shelter that we have at the outermost limits of that. It's everything stripped away. That is all. The only shelter we have is the sky, That's if once you got to see it as stripping everything away.
The only roof of Earth.
I think of it as the ozone layer.
So I was looking up a couple of things in your discussion of nihilism. And so I think of nihilism as Russian, and it goes back earlier. Existentialism is like a later phase.
Okay.
And when I looked, because I knew that Camus was from Algeria. So I looked up something on that, and in the beginning, it says that that Bowles introduced existentialism to the English-speaking world by translating No Exit in 1946.
Mm-hmm.
And then talking about Camus, he considers, you know, The Stranger to be a work of genius. And so I think his stuff is really, I think is really strongly rooted in existentialism. I mean, whatever his philosophy is, and he's got a lot of different philosophical ideas that are fascinating. I mean, we could just go through and quote some of our favorite philosophical ideas in this book, because that's some of the richest part of it.
Yeah, that was my favorite part of it, but I don't know the names of each idea.
Well, I don't know that they all have names. I think he's just, for him, I think it's about stripping it away and what is left, and he philosophizes about that. And so the philosophy is different in different places. He's got philosophies on life. One of my favorite quotes on life is, you know, when they talk about whether it's, you know, but when she's saying, before I was 20, I used to think that life was a thing that kept gaining impetus. It would get richer and deeper each year. You keep learning more, getting wiser, having more insight, going further into the truth. And she hesitated, and he laughs abruptly. And now you know it's not like that, right? It's more like smoking a cigarette. The first few puffs, it tastes wonderful, and you don't even think of it ever being used up. Then you begin taking it for granted. And suddenly you realize it's nearly burned down to the end. And that's when you're conscious of the bitter taste.
Incredible.
I mean, these are just, that's not existentialism. That's just Bowles. That's Bowles' philosophizing. And there's other parts where he does similar things that are equally amazing. But it comes when you strip everything down and the characters are musing about what do we have left when you strip it all away.
It's interesting, Mark, you bring up that cigarette quote, because going to the chronology, in 1947, so a couple of years before publishing the book, Bowles begins Majun, a date jam made from cannabis sativa, tries Kif, which he will begin smoking regularly in large quantities from the 1950s to the 1980s, when health problems force him to reduce his consumption to 1 cigarette a day.
Oh, I believe it. I mean, I think he's got so many, I mean, some of those nightmarish images, or the idea of being lost out in the fortress and wandering into this tent and almost getting taken, or her wandering into the train. All these are like trippy scenes of things that happen. They're probably based on things that happened to him. And he's capturing the feeling, that terrorizing, adventurous, exciting, roller coastery feeling of it.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, other things are sensory. It's like, you know, I mean, I love this one line where talking about I don't know if I'll find it right now, about the desert. You know, it was about the desert, and it was about the screams of the locusts were like screeching the heat of the desert. You know, it's like, these are real.
Yeah.
I mean, I would call him surreal, but if he was actually, you know, smoking and doing kip, whatever kip is, then I think that probably he had these kind of, you know, he was experiencing life in this altered way. Being in a different place is already altered.
Yeah.
And then doing it on altering drugs makes it even, you know, exponentially more so.
Not to mention his incredible illness and death scenes. So that those might have been very much hallucinogenic induced. Sorry, Doreen?
Now, that whole idea of infinite, like on my page 248, so that would be chapter 24,
Yeah.
where she says, Port had said, death is always on the way, but the fact you don't know when it will arrive seems to take away from the finiteness of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's that terrible precision that we hate so much. We don't know. We get to think of life as an inexhaustible well. Yet everything happens only a certain number of times in a very small number. How many times will you remember a certain afternoon of your childhood? Some afternoon that's so deeply a part of your being you can't even conceive of your life without it. Perhaps 4 or 5 times more, perhaps not even that. And yet it all seems limitless. Oh my God.
So does Bowles believe in life after death? Or is he a different kind of existentialist? I don't know.
I don't see suggestions of life after death in
Or
I don't either.
Yeah, I don't either.
He is questioning it, so why else? Well, anyway, the infinite. There was something. I love the locust. I think the sound of the locust, Mark, that you were mentioning, that was one of the passages that I thought were really beautiful. There was one earlier at page 92, which is chapter 8, where he goes, as they approached it, already they could see the endless flat desert beyond, broken here and there by sharp crests of rock that rose above the surface like the dorsal fins of so many monstrous fish, all moving in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
So whether he was on KIF or something else, he came up with some incredible imagery inspired by truly inspiring surroundings.
Well, what about the haunting title of the first book? Does anyone want to take that one on?
Of Tea of the Sahara?
Uh-huh. Come on, Doreen.
Not sure. I'm not sure.
Right, so that's the parable about the 3 ladies who go to have tea and they all end up dead with sand in their teacups.
Yes.
And then the next thing is they're having like tea in this broken down hotel. An impending death of some kind, the 3 of them, even though they're not 3 women.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I say, like, it's so much despair. And I'm not a despairing kind of person. And I find it hard to understand. Like, I must say I enjoyed it. I thought it was like so well written and it completely took me with it. But by the time it was over, I was like, it's the end, the freaking last line. It's the end of the road. End of line. Like, really?
It takes the romanticism out of, these girls who have a terrible life, right? Of having to essentially sell themselves, and then they manage to take what they have, escape into the desert and go chase the highest dune to have the tea and live out their romantic dream. And they are exposed to the elements and die. It's a really viscerally savage view of romantic yearning.
One of the many clashes, I think, of this book is between New World, Old World. And so we have these somewhat naive Americans coming, and this is a little bit of a trope, but they come over to the Old World, and there's like all these really deeply dark, pessimistic histories and fables and all these things. So the story of the innocent American abroad who then is put in contact with very different cultures that reverberate from whether it's nihilism or pessimism or reality. I'm not sure which. I didn't get the epitaph on the Tea of the Sahara. Did anyone get this? It's by Eduardo Malaya, and it says, each man's destiny is personal only insofar as it may happen to resemble what is already in his memory. I don't know.
I think that's the writer commenting.
Yeah, that's Bowles. I agree. So
this is the man's destiny is in this book, right? And it's personal only insofar as it happens to resemble what's in my own memory of my own life. I think maybe that's how I would interpret it, but otherwise I don't know.
Yeah. Well, he liked putting out some riddles, that's for sure.
That one is a riddle.
Will we be able to cross the T in the Sahara if we are able to solve the riddle?
So what's the next one? For book 2, it's
Were there more questions?
That I had? No.
Okay.
You guys, it's open questions now.
goodbye, said the dying man to the mirror they hold in front of him. We won't be seeing each other anymore. I'm not seeing the life after death here, Ben. I feel like you got to let that go. He is not advocating it.
But I'm still intrigued by Tennessee Williams implying that Bowles is giving us, he's giving us a criticism.
It's spiritual. That doesn't mean that he believes that it's religious.
Yeah, no, but the Sahara of moral nihilism, and that Bowles actually then. So what's the opposite of that? Then it's just some kind of spiritualism.
What's the opposite? No, I mean, nihilism can be the conclusion of a spiritual search. I mean, It's a spiritual search that they're philosophical, spiritual, pilgrimage to find out what is at the bottom of it all. And it just happens that the conclusion of his spiritual journey is nothingness, or blending into, to the world or whatever. It's hard for me to comment because I haven't read the final piece, but
that sounds more materialistic to me, honestly, Mark, because so spiritual, meaning that there is spirit, there are spirits, there is a spirit life, and that's the idea that there's something beyond what we see. So the materialist world is all what we deal in, and then the spiritual world is. And so I understand that some spiritual journeys might end in a kind of darkness. I'm not sure if that's what I think of as a spiritual journal, but people might believe they're one. But if you end up in nihilism, that sounds kind of materialistic to me, because then you're saying there is nothing beyond. It's just nothingness.
If there was nothing, then what's the point of a search for meaning? So existentialism is spiritual in the sense that it's seeking out the meaning, in what is there. I guess maybe we're defining spiritualism in different ways, because the way you're defining it is it's got to be connected to the spirits and the existence of something beyond the world. And I'm defining it in a way that it doesn't have to be. His conclusion can be that we'd like that romantic view, but in fact, we're all just having tea in the desert.
Mm.
So spiritual, you're defining as like a search for meaning.
Yeah, that's what I think existentialism is at its heart.
At one point in the book, Port said he's lost. I think it's after he's lost his passport. But anyway, he says, "Without my passport, I'm not sure who I am."
Mm-hmm.
And he also says it takes a lot of. He's looking at the landscape, and he says it takes a lot of energy to invest meaning into the landscape, and I don't have that energy right now.
Mm-hmm.
So life will mean something if we can bring energy and invest it and inject it sort of into our lives. And he can't do that. There's another tremendous passage that I think is spiritual, although I'm hesitant about using that word. But let's see, this is in chapter 5, the very end of chapter 5. I'm sorry, 15. That night he awoke sobbing. His being was a well 1,000 miles deep. He rose from the lower regions with a sense of infinite sadness and repose. but with no memory of any dream save the faceless voice that had whispered, "The soul is the weariest part of the body."
Mm-hmm.
The night was silent, save for a small wind that blew through the fig tree and moved the loops of wire hanging there. Back and forth they rubbed, creaking ever so slightly. After he had listened a while, he fell asleep. The soul is the weariest part of the body.
And why is that? Perhaps because it's eternal.
Oh,
Or not.
it's the weariest part of the body because he's soul sick. You know that term, soul sick?
Mhm.
No.
He's soul sick. It's
What does that mean?
his spiritual side just isn't there. He cannot invest life with meaning. Well,
Mhm.
maybe I'll write in my notebook. Oh, but he doesn't. Maybe I'll approach Kid again, but he doesn't. And then he becomes ill. You could almost say that his illness, his fever, is part of his soul sickness,
It's a manifestation for sure.
a definite manifestation. But I thought this is a beautifully written, but he wakes sobbing. He cries again when he's got typhus. And
So again, I just am putting it out there because after Tennessee Williams gave me a slightly different perspective, that I'm thinking, well, Bowles is Kit's end in insanity the natural result of nihilism and existentialism. So is he putting it all out there and then saying, you know what, maybe it goes nowhere?
in terms of the novel itself, she goes mad and she's become sex drugged and almost poisoned by the culture that she's become a part of.
Mhm.
At first, she feels a tremendous freedom, when she takes her little bag and she feels this great freedom. She's throwing off everything, and then she joins the caravan, but it destroys her. So in terms of the novel, is this nihilism? No, but it's the fact that when you leave, even if it's only your lipstick and your dresses and everything, and you go into this strange otherness, you'll be destroyed. And that's what happens to her. And then Port becomes diseased. He doesn't have the energy to invest either life or the landscape with meaning.
And Tuner?
But in this passage that I just read, it doesn't seem that things are meaningless, only that the soul is very weak.
Mhm.
The spiritual side is very weak.
I mean, she sees the dreams are important in this, and for her, they're very important. They're omens. So she is very much spiritual in the way that you would define it, because for her, there is this sense that everything is filled with meanings, and it's just about interpreting them.
Right.
They're all over the place.
Supernatural.
And I also would point out about her that she's like, before she gets, I haven't gotten to the sex crazed part of it, but she's definitely drinks like she's filling a big old void in her life. And so that's very consistent that it might move from one to the other.
And just to ask about the end of the book, and I'm sorry, Mark, that try not to give anything away.
No, go for it.
But we're seeing her. The last lines that Doreen had a wonderful, direct, sincere reaction to. The end of the line. Instead of insanity, was there something freeing about this for her?
Was there something what?
Freeing.
I mean, she didn't want to go back with Tuner. She could have. She made a choice.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there because I think it's assumed that she's insane and that And Tobias Wolff seems to say that this is, complete from submission even to oblivion. But has she rid herself of everything? Has she arrived at an existentialist utopia? I don't know. I'm just trying to put a difference. Is it insanity or bad insanity, good insanity? What do you think?
Well, do you think that the girls enjoyed their tea on the highest dune? Was it liberating?
Well, they were purposeful, that's for sure.
Huh?
They were purposeful, that's for sure.
They did what they'd always wanted to do.
Dreams come true.
I think that these are, these are impossible questions. It's not I don't think you can think of it in terms of freeing. I mean, the whole book is about freeing our views of everything and being stripped down to the essence. And I think that is the journey. That is the spiritual journey for Bowles to take us through. And what you find at the end there is just what he finds at the end there is how you want to interpret it. I mean, is that freeing to get to come to that stripped down realization? What for him is a realization, which you might reject. I don't know that freeing is the right word when the consequence is an endless absolute night, and swallowed up by the elements and the end of all life for you. And you are, after all, humanity.
Well, what does happen to her afterwards? Does anyone have any thoughts?
Well, I'm looking at, in my book, let's see, this is chapter 29 near the end. She's being, again, put on a plane here.
Mhm.
She gave up and was lifted again to a sitting position. She can't even walk. Where she remained, her head thrown far backward. The sudden roar of the plane's motor behind her smashed the walls of the chamber where she lay. Before her eyes was the violent blue sky, nothing else. For an endless moment, she looked into it like a great overpowering sound. It destroyed everything in her mind, paralyzed her. Someone once had said to her that the sky hides the night behind it, shelters the person beneath from the horror that lies above. Unblinkingly, she fixed the solid emptiness, and the anguish began to move in her. At any moment, the rip can occur, the edges fly back, and the giant maw will be revealed. Oh, horrible.
Yeah. And yet she also had amazing moments of lucidness, where she actually is able to respond to questions in French or whatnot.
Yes.
But yeah, there it is. That's anyway, I like trying to provoke with some questions.
Oh, that's good, Ben.
So I don't know about you guys, but I've grown to like the book more from this discussion, which I think is one of the highest possible results of a book club.
I find that with almost all of our discussion.
Isn't it? That you come away with new appreciation. You go, well, this is maybe deeper than I thought.
Exactly that. Everyone, you get the sum of everyone's appreciations or depreciations.
Or we think together, so that we're bouncing ideas off each other, and it kind of opens up new avenues with a little bit of humor along the way.
But I do think that it's, first of all, it's so well written. And it makes you think so much about the meaning of life, whether you agree or disagree with the different viewpoints he puts out there. It's so provocative.
Right. Well,
yeah, there's a philosophy of experiencing and appreciating this day. And, maybe you're not going to make it to that cave this day or any other day, but this day you have.
Well, remember the blurb that I used in order to get you to vote for Sheltering Sky was, "The Sheltering Sky is one of the most original, even visionary works of fiction to appear in this century," according to Tobias Wolff. So, you know, that's an interesting point, and I think original is absolutely true. I don't know if I've read any other book like this one.
I like this better than the French existentialist novels that I read in high school.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
in that sense, it captures everything. I mean, it doesn't leave anything behind, and it does it in a way that brings you along for the journey.
So, well, good. Any other thoughts before? Oops. Any other thoughts before? Because maybe we should talk a little bit about next meeting.
What's the next book?
Well, we don't have one.
Oh.
Yeah. So, and this is when we normally